All right, I think we are ready to rock and roll. Uh, all settings seem to be good. Ears itchy as one might expect. Okay. That is, I think, good. Hello, everybody, if you're watching live, or hello, later viewers, if you watch the archive of this. Welcome to live stream 40 in my Sublime Text live coding, where we're going to be doing some work on override audit, and these are the last couple of things that I want to get implemented prior to dropping a 2.1 release. So there is a little bit of code cleanup that has to happen still in the hover pop-up code. The way that the HTML is being generated could be a little bit nicer. It's functional, could look nicer. It's not quite up to my standard, but it works. And my policy is always make it work, then make it beautiful, or make it work, then make it fast, or make it work, then make it fast and beautiful. Because it doesn't matter how nice the code looks or how well it performs if it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. But I digress. You caught me here. I have been playing a little bit with my Terminus settings. The most recent video on my other channel, when the package parade, was covering Terminus, and it occurred to me while I was using it earlier that in fact I should be using view settings here to set Yoshevska term as the font. The default font that I use in my Sublime Text is Yosevka style set 9, but the term variant of that doesn't include these things. I can't remember what they're called right now. Having a little bit of a brain fart moment. But that sort of thing you don't want to have happen in your terminal, and up until a few moments ago it did. So I went ahead and fixed that all up. But hello everybody. Let's go ahead and get this party started, shall we? I'm going to start by doing this. Now that that's done, I'd like to say hello, fellow Sublime Text Fanatics. Welcome to this live stream. We're going to be working on some override audit here with a nod towards getting towards excuse me, override audit 2.1 with the features that we have been working on in the last few live streams. There wasn't a live stream last week because my anniversary fell on the day that the stream would happen, and I did tentatively schedule the stream for the Wednesday, but there wasn't really time for that, so I had to go ahead and push it until now. So this, I think, will be the last override audit stream for a bit. I do need to do a little bit more code cleanup on some of the stuff that's already been done in regards to the hover pop-up in these jiggies here. I like the way that the HTML is being generated, except for the fact that the horizontal line underneath the package name sometimes goes off the edge of the pop-up and sometimes doesn't. Also, the code that generates it looks a little ugly, as you may remember from the streams where we were working on that because we were trying to make it display what we want. And I think I have that all done. Might want to also tweak some of this stuff. For example, this links to, excuse me, I got a frog in my throat tonight, the packages repository. I'm going to click that and it's going to open in a tab over on the other desktop because that's how that works. And it pops here, as we can see. But I think I could actually tack the package name onto the end of that maybe to have it pop out in here. Or I guess it would have to be tree master and the name of the package or some such. That's something to think about so that those packages that do exist in the packages repository there have the appropriate a link that takes you more to their code than just the repository that they're in. But no, maybe not. And of course, one unpacked resources. I'm too anal for that. It should say one unpacked resource. That code needs to be cleaned up a little bit. That's not something that is eminently stream worthy in the extreme. It's just sort of cleaning up the code refactoring a little bit. That's not particularly interesting or Sublime Text related. What we are going to be working on, though, are these two items here, and that should see us to the 2.1 release. So the first one is contextual create override, and the second one is make the mini diff based on the underlying unpacked file. That's actually should say packed file. I think I pointed that out in the last stream. What does contextual create override mean? Simply this. We know that we have implemented this functionality to say we want to create an override, and then we could choose a package like, say, AppleScript and the AppleScript Sublime syntax. And that's going to pop this tab up for us that is editable. It's backed by the packed version of the file. The file is left as being marked as a scratch buffer, so you can close the buffer if you want without making changes until you make your first change. This is, I think, functionally superior to, I'm going to close that, than using package resource viewer open resource to do the same thing, because we would pick AppleScript and we'd pick syntax. And although it lets us open a second file right away, it's set the base document based on what the underlying file is, which is nothing. That file doesn't exist. So the gutter shows the entire file being modified. Also, as we can see down here, the cursor is at line 724, column 1, because it ran an insert to paste this data in, which means as soon as you touch something, it jumps to the bottom. Not a fan of that. So I like the way ours works for the purposes of being able to create overrides. I did think maybe we might want to add a view resource, which would work the same way as view package file does. And here we could say Apple syntax, like so, to find that, but it would go by packages instead. I don't know how much that is useful because this is here. And I found in a lot of cases when helping people on Stack Overflow and such of that nature, when it comes time to they want to edit a package, they don't know where a syntax is. For example, just recently there was a question on Stack Overflow. Someone wanted to disable the bash syntax, but they didn't know what package to ignore, and the answer to that actually is the shell script package, because it packs a few syntaxes in. If you didn't know where a specific syntax file was being stored, it's really hard to find it. Here, AppleScript, that's a pretty good way to go. I'm going to pick. Ah, wrong window, had to focus. Open that file, excuse me. But for example, if you said you wanted to look at the C single file build and you were new to Sublime, someone would tell you to use package resource for your open resource, so you would. And then you look for the C package and you don't see it. Pun mildly intended. There's a C# and a C++. There's no C package. Well, it turns out that's actually in the C package, because those two things are very tightly coupled with each other. Here's the C single file.sublime build right here. So if you were instead to use view package file for that, then you could say C single file, and you could totally see, oh, here's the C and the C++, and that's the thing, and open it, right? So I like the idea of that, but you might still want to override one of these files while you do something. And of course, you can't type in these. How would you actually do this? Well, we know that if we said view.filename here, this has the file name that this file would have if it actually existed. So we could try to save as it. We'd have to know that it goes in a package named AppleScript, so we'd have to click the button to create that folder, save the buffer. But of course, this buffer, as we've seen, is still marked as read-only, so you have to close the buffer and reopen it just to be able to get your override created. What if you could right-click on this and there was an item here that said override this resource? Which would do the exact same thing as choosing it the other way. It would promote this buffer in a way that it becomes an override. That's what contextual create override is going to be all about here. The second option there is making minidiff based on the underlying unpacked file. Now, for an example of that, if I was to open the edit the override exec.py, we'll see if I use the key bindings, there aren't any changes here as far as this is concerned. And that's because I have mini-diff turned on, but the mini-diff diffs against the state of, for files that aren't in Git, it diffs against the state of the file that's was on disk at the time the file was loaded. So if you add some spaces here, you get those diff lines to tell you. And when you save the buffer, the diff is still based on the file as of when it was opened. So now these are the changes that were there since the file was opened, and I have to close the file and reopen it to get those to go away. All right, I'm going to go ahead and delete that. What this number 2 feature here suggests is, what if there was a setting to allow you to say that you want this to happen, and if that was the case, when you opened one of these things, you would see diffs, and the diffs would always be applied based on the packed version of the file, not the unpacked version of the file as seen there. So that you could always tell when you were editing something. That might even obviate the need to be able to do this to see how this file is different from the underlying one, and I guess it's because I removed a line between Signal and Sublime that I shouldn't have. I think there used to be a line there. Yeah. So that's the sort of thing that would be, handy to see. So that's what the other feature is going to be there. So let's go ahead and get started on that. And I think the first thing we would have to do, let's go ahead and something else that I've been pondering is a release script of some sort. There's a checklist of things that for creating and deploying a new release. You have to update the package by updating the README and the changelog, adding a new entry in messages.json or JSON if applicable, and adding a new message file in here. These are the messages that are displayed when the package is installed or uploaded, or sorry, upgraded. Also, I need to update the web version, the website, because it has web versions of the documentations. This actually should be down here, what I was doing there. And then release the code by merging the master code to stable. Let's go ahead and change that too. Merge master to stable. Tag a release using this. I like to use annotated tags. Then push the changes up. That's all that's needed. Changes and new tag. Let's add that. I mean, I know to do that, but I like to be complete in my notes. These are the things that have to happen. Is it possible to create some sort of script to optimize this? I was kind of playing with that a little bit. I'm not sure. But let us say we want to look at create override.py, because there is some code in here. We're going to go ahead and do that. That we kind of already want here, self.setupView, which is this. Specifically, I think this code here. If this command, what this does, if you remember when we were actually working on this, after it's opened the file, it sets a setting in it that says that it is a new override, and then it calls SetupView, which is this code here, which if the file is still loading, then it sets a timeout to reinvoke itself after a little bit, because sometimes you can't change some of these settings while the file is loading, particularly because while the file is loading, I think the actual type of the file isn't fully known yet, and the syntax isn't fully known yet. So if you try to change the settings and then the file finishes loading, the settings actually get wiped out. I think that's what's happening. And then there are various things we have to do: get the settings and the mini diff, move the cursor to the beginning of the file, make sure it's not read-only, and if mini diff is turned on, set the reference document. All of this stuff should happen, needs to happen in order to set up a new buffer that is read-only potentially. So we actually want to abstract this out, and I think actually, and I have to remember why this setting is set here before calling SetupView. So let's look in events.py. Create override event listener. These settings only apply to that. So before a file is saved, if that's an override, it creates the file. Otherwise, it generates an error. And if the file is modified, that happens. So I think the reason for this happening here is because of that. The very first thing we want to do, because setup view might be deferred by a little bit, we want that setting to be set before we call setup view, because if this is deferred and someone saves the file or starts editing in the brief period of time before this code in runs and actually finishes, that might be a problem. Alternatively, we could drop this down into setup view before view is loading. So calling setup view would do that, and then it would set that setting. And then if view is loading, it would go ahead and do that stuff. Would that be a potential issue, having that set multiple times? Because in that case, if it set the setting and then called setup view after a period of time, would that cause an issue? Let's see. The way it is now, that setting is set so that the settings listener gets triggered right away. So on pre-save. Oh, I think I'm getting kickback from the fan here. I think I need to lean forward more. Yeah, that's unfortunate. Sorry about that. I will attempt to lean forward. It's one of those days where it's quite warm. I need to have a fan blowing on me, and I ran various tests to make sure that it wasn't interfering with the headset, but that didn't include me lounging back in my chair while I was thinking. I was sitting in a more protected position, hiding behind my work laptop. So the reason this setting is set here before setup view is so that the event listener can trigger stuff on it before these things get triggered. So if you created this and then immediately started typing, it would do the work that it needs to do, which I think is a good idea. Even though this is setting read only false, it is possible, I think, for this to trigger otherwise. I guess if there's an unpacked file, it would just go. So if there's no unpacked file, then it opens the version of the file from the thing. So it would just always be read-only, so that can't actually happen. A save can happen, though. So, okay, one of the events is before you save, do that, and the other one is if you type something. So theoretically possible to do that, choose the item, and as the instant you hit enter, just immediately hit Control S to save. It could be theoretically possible to respond to the key that fast. I don't know if Sublime can respond that fast, but that's the sort of thing that I wouldn't want to rely on. So I like the idea of the setting being set as soon as possible. Now, these items here, if you as the buffer is about to be saved, we erase the is new override thing, which removes the view listener on it. So if this line was here, then every time setup view is called, that would happen. So is it possible to save a buff file before it's even loaded? I'm going to go ahead and move this down here. I think. Okay. Let's go ahead and change this. Activate the view. Okay. Get the active view and set it up as a potential new override. Let's do that. Okay, and also something I'm going to do here is pop the console out into a window over on my other desktop just so I can see what's happening there. So when I do that, I can see that happening. And I think that means if I did this, created override for ASP on comments, I can type in here as desired. So that's good. Oh, you know what? I just thought of another great aspect of this that I hadn't previously considered. So that seems, I think, to work. I guess I should probably follow that all the way through, shouldn't I? Create override for ASP. I mean, that must have gotten the appropriate setting there. So the buffer is marked as not read-only. That means if I close it, nothing happens. Okay, so that means that part worked. Again, I'm going to pick ASP. Let's pick indexed symbol list. I'm going to go ahead and save it. And now we're seeing some stuff. I'm going to close that, and I'm going to do a little bit of that. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so let's diff that. There's no differences found. Let's delete it. Yes, okay, so that seems like it works just dandy. So what we want is this setup view code to not be here, but be in something else. And I think maybe the core is where this should be. So let's copy this and let's jump to core and do that again. Let's see. Get, ignore, package with, decorate, package name. Where's a nice place? Open override, delete override, freshen override, diff override. Those are diff, revert, find, extract packed, delete packed. Let's go here. And this would be named setup setup new override view. It wouldn't have self as an argument. It would apply that setting. And what it would invoke is not self.view, but setup new override view, like so. There we go. Just to double check. Okay, it wasn't in the autocomplete because I hadn't saved the file yet or something. Sublime, load settings, mini diff, view run command, view set read only. I think that's pretty much all we want for that. So given a view that represents a potential new override, set it up so that our event handler will create an override on save. This presumes that the view passed in is read-only. Whoops. Did it do something about a scratch view here? No, huh? Yeah. I think that's probably okay. And just mark read only. Renew view. Okay. Oh, well, pardon me for just a second. Sorry about that. Okay. Given a view that represents a potential new override, set it up so our event handler will create an override on save. This presumes the view passed in is read only. It will be marked as such. It will be marked as non-read only once it is finished loading. If the mini diff setting is turned on, the reference document will be set to the content of the buffer when this is called. Okay, if we're going to do that, now do I have, no, I just have a core dot. Okay, so we're gonna do that, and maybe we're just gonna stick that here, let's say. So set new override view, like so. Okay, we're gonna come down here and we're going to say, let's say set new. Oh, punk. Set up new. set up, new, copy. That one's not interesting. This is the one we're looking at. This should be set up, new override view. And then this would call setup, new override view for view. And remove. We're going to comment that, whoops. We're going to comment that out. And we're going to remove this. I think reloading this the reload worked, but I think that will still work even though it's calling that method because the class that used to exist still has that. But let's see. ActionScript syntax. Yeah, it's still marked as read only. Oh, there you go. So it actually blew up because that object has no object setup view. Nice. So that means we could do that. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to do that, and then reload. And now I can say create override. Now batch file syntax test. That seems like it's doing what we want. Great, close without saving. Let's try it one more time with ActionScript that. So if I close, looks like I close that, that's okay. And if I picked it again and picked ActionScript syntax, I can modify it. Okay, great. So that is all doing exactly what we want. Bully for us. So that's the first aspect of this. We're going to leave that there. Now, what we need is a new command. Commands happen here. Some of these are contextual and some of them aren't. So revert override is an example of a context command, right? Yes, revert changes to the given override. So everybody hands up if you remember how we create a new one of these bad boys. So I think we would save as this, and we might save it to, we already have create override, so we might name this context create override. Because I really don't want to fiddle with the idea of create override being a command you execute with arguments plus also this one, because there is some stuff that's going to be different about it. So override audit, I would call this context create override, I think, just to differentiate it from that one. Otherwise, bad stuff will happen. And that is the thing we're going to need. So we're going to need to, instead of reverting the override, we're going to need that. This other stuff I'm going to assume we probably also still need. And in commands, init.py, we might need to say this. From .context create override import override audit context create override command, and do that and paste that, whoops, there, a little bit of that action. And I think that should be enough because it's just going to pull all the commands out. So let's go ahead and reload this. It seems to have reloaded. And then for this, we might say, and a little bit of that. Push F5. It's got more stuff in it than I would have given it credit for. I guess we probably didn't need that after all. Okay, so that has reloaded. So if I said view, what is wrong with me? View run command. Override audit context create override. Well, I would have expected it to do, you know, anything. Let's quit and restart just to make sure that things are kosher. Doop. No, huh? Well, shoot. What did we do wrong? I didn't see any errors loading this, so I'm assuming. Yeah. And where's the D? There's a shell script plugin in the shell script package. That's good to know. File manager, origami outliner. Override audit. Override audit. All right. Core.loaded. I assume we saw initializing. Yes. Who remembers how this thing even works? You know? Not me, clearly. It's importing everything from source, and everything from source includes commands, so that should make the command visible. So I think the problem is that there's one in here too. There we go. It's all logical when you get there. Context create. Okay, reload that. How about that? Now let's try that from a fresh restart. Fresh restarts fix a lot of problems, you know? Don't tell me there's one missing dependency. Am I spelling this wrong? We're seeing it in the source init.py as override audit. We're seeing it in the commands from context create override import that. We're seeing it in that string as well. And we're seeing it there. So the problem, such as it is that I'm an idiot. And this is the thing that's causing the problem. Sheesh. There we go. Drunk in charge of coding, and I don't even drink. So how do we actually want this to go? We need this to happen only in the context menu, not in the tab context. Because the tab context menu is the one you get for right-clicking on a tab. That's never going to exist for something that you're creating an override. Oh, actually it is, isn't it? Interesting. All right, we'll open that one, and we will open context.sublime menu like so. Okay. We're going to add one more here. Edit diff. Oh, it's going to be a create here. Command override audit context create override. And then we're going to, just for now, we're going to say the args are always visible. Yeah, we definitely want that to be false. This is very much something that should not exist except for in the menu, except for when we think that it should. So that's nice. We're going to copy that, and we're going to drop it in the tab context menu as well. We're going to need to change the arguments here. So the args for this are going to be this bad boy. How much of that did I do? Just that, right? Yeah, okay, that's got to go there. Then we come over here and we go like that, because I am a slave to conformity. That's a different thing, so that one doesn't matter. There we go. These ones are all different, but that didn't bother me before, so it still doesn't bother me now. Isn't that neat? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and close that. We're going to go ahead and close that. Now, if always visible, return true. We set those to false, so that's not going to happen. We need the view context. We don't need it to, oh, yeah. This is the part where it's both easy and tricky at the same time. I think actually what we should do is one more. We're going to set this to true. We're going to do that in this one too. So that should just always be in there. There it is down there. Override, audit, revert, override. Okay. And here in this menu, it's up there. Okay, good. So it's just always in both of those things. And so we're going to comment this out for now, like so. So if we told it to always be visible, it's always visible. Otherwise, it's never visible and is enabled. Here is the magic. When do we want this to be enabled? File path could represent an override. Say file does not exist on disk. File path could represent an override in packages path. Probably the same logic we used in the other one. So if it doesn't exist on disk, okay, and the other test, the destination view is read only because we don't want it to trigger for any file that's already open. So let's go through these things like one at a time. So if we're going to say self view target, I think that's going to give us something. We're going to do that. Okay. Let's go ahead and zonk that out for just a second. That still reloads, right? Let's do that. Yeah, that seems to reload in the Jim Dandiest of potential ideas here. And is the stream still running? It seems to be. Oh, I see. I pushed the wrong button there at some point. That was an unfortunate turn of events on my part. Okay, so that does seem to be doing something. Oh wow, that stream is just like really far out of whack now. So there's that. So the first thing that we want for this is to print view.filename, let's say. We'll also print view.isReadOnly. That's a thing, right? Yep, okay. Oops, Control 1, come over here. If I did that, so if I right click, that should be is enabled, right? But it's not printing anything. What about up here? Let's change the description first. Return an override audit a override this resource. Okay, like so. Reload that. So now it says override this resource. And the run method does nothing but print we, right? So if I did that, oh yeah, now it's doing something. If I did that, it says we. Great. So we're saying we're getting false and that. And if I did, whoops, view package file or yeah, add line before. What's this say? This is read only. Okay, good. So the first thing we want here is that, right? View if we'll do it okay, let's say if view dot is read only, return true. So that takes care of that one. We'll move that up. So now destination view is read only. So if we do that, the command I would think should be disabled. Oh, sorry, it's the wrong way. Let's swap this to be false now. Okay, reload that. So now it's disabled there. It's disabled from that tab. You see it down there. In this tab context, it is enabled. And inside this file, it is enabled. Nice. Okay, so that part's good. So that's this. Destination view is read only. File does not exist on disk. We're going to need to. No, is file. All right, that seems to be. What does that actually do? Let's see, os.path.isFile. Let's go ahead and click on that, shall we? And bring this tab over here so the world can see. The world! True if path is an existing regular file. Follows symbolic links. Okay, which is sort of like asking if it exists, but knowing that if it's a file. So grandiose. I'm going to move that over there for the time being. If view is read-only and not is file. Oh. View.filename is not none. And this is going to be a big one. If the view is read only and the view file name is not none, and where was I going with that? Os dot is file. No, not just that. This just not is file view dot file name. Why is that not correct? Oh, one more. Destination file is read-only. File does not exist on disk. Path could represent an override. We probably want that one first, I think. Name equals view.filename. Let's say like that, okay? Then we can say this. If name is none, return false. Because if buffers that don't have names can't be converted into overrides, right? I think because you might note that it's currently disabled there. But nevertheless, so if the view is read-only and now here, sublime.packages path. Where is check potential override? What does this do? Given a file name, check to see if this could conceivably be a reference to an override. There is a shipped or installed package with the name given in the file name. This only checks that the file could potentially be an override. Set deep to true to actually look inside of the package itself to see if this really represents an override or not. Okay. If there isn't any file name, it's not. That is enough for this to work in the events.py. So let's copy that out. It's going to need extra stuff to find it, though. Your file name is none. Okay. I'm not sure actually what that'll do, because this thing up here gets the file name, and if it isn't one or it's not a file, it leaves. So we might need to check that code a little deeper, actually. But we'll go ahead and throw this up here for the time being. I think that's not going to compile. Yeah. I think we need another one of those. How many of those can there be? Oh, right. Yeah. Once it fails to reload, it's never going to reload again. That's right. There we go. So there we go. That's nice. Let's go ahead and junk all that out because we don't care. Actually, what we could just do here is say set up new override view for self.view. That part should pretty much be done. I guess we might also say a log message of some sort there, but we don't need to worry about that. This isn't anything that's going to trigger, so we can get rid of that. I don't even know that we need a description on this per se, because we're not going to change any of those, but we're going to leave that there for now. And here we go. So we're back to what does this do? Given a file name. If it could conceivably be a reference. So it takes a file name. If there isn't a base file name, it returns none. Get a relative path, get only the first path component. Oh, my goodness. It actually scans the installed packages folder, huh? Maybe we need a better version of this. Okay, let's do it the long way then, until we know. We can leave that in there for the time being. We'll just say, may not need this actually. Clean it up if not. And I think, let's close that. Let's close that. The other thing we want here is create override to see what this actually did. Because open normally if an unpacked copy exists. So if that file exists, it just opens it and nothing happens. Verify that the package contains the resource. So we would need to know what the package and the resource is. Yeah. Okay. We'll copy this here. We may need to steal some code. We'll drop this over here for now. We'll drop it in after this thing here, like so. That way, it doesn't really matter. So destination view is read only. Let's do this in segments, and then we'll make sure that it's working, and then we can try to combine them together. Okay. Unnamed buffers can't represent overrides. Neither can views. Oh, sorry. Unnamed buffers or unnamed or editable buffers can't represent new overrides. And I guess the logic for that is if it's unnamed, you just created a new tab, that ain't overriding anything. And if it's a file that's editable, then it must be a file that has already been loaded successfully, in which case it's also not a potential override because you can't load packages from disk. This is specifically for read-only buffers that represent packages. If name is none or not view.is read only, return false. Can't enable no name or the view is editable. Okay. Maybe still can be enabled. And then we print the name of the thing. Actually, here we could just print name, right? We can put that up there. That's our debug line. We don't need those. If is file view.file name. That's not right now. Then print can't enable file already exists on disk, and that's a false in that case. So that takes care of the view is read-only and file does not exist on disk. In between there, we want file path could represent an override. Okay, let's take that one out. Let's see what we got thus far. That seems to load. So if I do this, we see can't enable, no name, or the view is editable. Right on. Here, can't enable, no view, or the name is editable. And though that file went away because I did that, didn't it? Yeah. That's actually, that's, oh, yeah, I guess it needs to get to the bottom of that for us to know if it actually did something, right? Print, I guess we can enable. And there we go. So can't enable, and this is a file that exists on disk, so it can't enable. Here's one that's read-only and doesn't exist on disk, so I guess we can enable. Good. So that takes care of destination view is read-only and file does not exist on disk. It's those ones. In the middle, we want file path could represent an override. And here we would say, if not name dot starts with sublime dot packages path. That's the thing that I did there, right? Print can't enable, this isn't a package file. So test that first before testing if it exists on disk, because doing a string comparison is faster than theoretically having to jump out to disk to be able to see. So now this should say, okay, so let's try something here. I shouldn't even need to do that. I could do this. Touch bob dot, my test dot text, make it not writable, and open it in Sublime. Okay, so now, well, that didn't really help, did it? But do that. No name or the view is editable. So if I said view dot set read only true, I can't type in it anymore. So this can't enable because this isn't a package file, and it also can't enable because file already exists on disk. And shouldn't it have said that first? Oh, it did. So it's printed the name, then it can't enable because this isn't a package file, and it already exists on disk. Was there not a return in there? Oh, there wasn't. Oh, no wonder. Return false. Derp. Sorry, I screwed myself up on that one. So although this is not read-only, it isn't a package file, so that's not a thing that it can possibly. Okay, that's good. So let us go ahead and rm for now. Yes. And close that tab. Beauty on that. And let us jump back to here. So we have destination view is read-only. The first thing we want to check, don't do anything in that case. File path could represent an override. It can't. It's not in the packages path. If the file already exists on disk. Now, the other thing here is the thing that this does, and does this do as well? Yeah, this. We would need to manipulate the file name of the thing to come up with this information. And I'm not 100%. No, the file that it gets is always in. Yeah, okay. Okay. So that's the stuff we jumped over here, right? So this is joining the full resource name that we have here into a resource. So I guess we would say res equals name. Oh, here's the thing where I can never remember. Hello there. Right? So that's that. If I want to strip it off like so. Okay. So I want that is equal to name len sublime dot packages path colon print res. Okay, so need one more. Packages path plus 1. Oh, do it in the right order. Because what we want there is to be the name of the package followed by the resource, whatever it is. Okay, and then going to want a little of that to convert the path. I think that's how that works. Yeah, because if you're on Windows, the path separators would be backslashes, and it always needs to be forward slashes for this operation because resources always use POSIX notation. So with that in place, reload that a couple of times. That says that. That gives us the equivalent of /.join package and the resource. So we could say this. We might drop that in, and well, I guess in this case we'd log that and then return false, like so, because this is enabled and not. So this is asking the file catalog to find a resource name. Oh, packages slash plot. Yeah, okay. I think that here we would say print file isn't part of this. Oh, sorry. can't enable file is not part of this package. Okay. Which is safe to do because what we're doing here is we've already determined that this is the path of a file that looks like it could appear inside of a package. This file is read-only, so it's not a file that was opened from disk. More specifically, its path starts with it has a name. It has a definite file name, so it has been saved. Or it has a name assigned to it, because it is possible for a view to have a file name even if it's not assigned, or the view is read only, and its path starts with packages path, and it's not a file that already exists. And if we search for the root name of this resource in resources and look, do we find the resource that this represents? And find resources will only find resources in a package that actually exist, and we've already determined it doesn't exist on disk, so this will tell us if it exists in a package or not. And in that case, it either says we can't enable or we can. So I think that means here it should say, I guess we can enable, because this is in the default package, right? Now I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to package. And I'm going to go to default. I'm going to, sample.txt, like that. Okay, and exit out of that. So here, this can't enable because it has no name or the view is editable. Well, we know it has a name, so we're going to say that whole thing that this. So now I can't type in this. So now when I do it, we get it can't enable because this file already exists on disk. So I'm going to say view.filename like this, and I'm going to do this. Now I'm going to say, oops, let's make a whole new one. We're going to say, make a whole new one, go to the console and say view.retarget, and what we're going to retarget it as is this. Okay. Maybe we should have wrapped that. I'm going to change that to sample2, so it's a file that doesn't exist. And go like so. So now this is what it thinks its name is. And if we right click, we can't enable because it does have a name, but the view is editable. So we would have to say view set read only. So now this is a read only buffer that exists in the packages path. So when I do it, it says it can't enable because this file is not a part of this package, right? So now if I did this and then copied this jiggy here like this, to here and said view.retarget, whoops, and pasted that. And I'm going to go ahead and close this because I'm not sure what happens otherwise. Then now it has a name. Its path is in the packages path. I can't type in it, and I guess we can enable because it is part of the package. So that is the magic of how we want this all to work. Swank. And this part doesn't need it anymore, like so. So enable the command if the view represents a file that can appear in that. Oh, sorry. We only enable the command for views where the file name indicates that this is a potential package file that only enable the command for views where the file name indicates that the view is a file rooted in the packages folder representing a file that does exist in a packed package, but does not currently exist on disk at all. Additionally, the view must be read-only in order for the... That part's not strictly necessary, but we need that. Whoops. I took one too far on that one. I meant to remove those ones. All of this stuff is really the stuff. Now, we could really combine all of these things, right? If name is none or not view is readable, or these are all, you either do this with a list of things and ors, or you do it with the reverse of all of these states and instead. I think that is where we're at with that. So we could remove all of these little print lines. Uh-huh. Sublime packages path appears twice here. So I might say SPP equals, whoops, sublime.packages path, just to make that a little bit nicer in the code. Makes that a lot shorter. Okay. Or is file. I don't need to say view.filename. Or is file name return false? Not rooted in the packages folder or already exists. We could join those pretty nicely. I think maybe we want to do that. Let's zoop that out. Or boom. Okay. If name is none or not view is read only or not name or is file. Okay. Unnamed. Yeah. Or editable buffers. Oh, yeah. And neither can files not in the packages folder. Or files that already exist. These are done in a specific order. So if it's an unknown tab, quit right away. If it's not read-only, quit right away. So it's only triggering 4 tabs that have a file name associated and are read-only. And in that case, we then check the path string before we actually hit the disk. Those can go away. We can only enable the command if this file represents a resource that actually exists in the package. Now, the funny thing about this per se is that, and maybe this is an issue and maybe it's not, I don't know. Using find resource like this requires that the package be not ignored, which means you can't create an override for a package that's actually disabled. And I would imagine if I looked at the package report, bring that over here. If I looked at, okay, vintage is currently disabled. So if I said I wanted to create an override on vintage, it actually exists in here. This one's going to let me do it. Huh. Okay, that is a hole in the current override thing. I think it should maybe disable hidden packages in that thing. So we'll fix that in a second. Oh, we can only enable the command. Okay, so in that case, this should be okay. So that is disabled there. And this one that represents, okay, file that actually exists and is in the package folder, definitely not. This is a not read-only thing, but it doesn't have a name, so it's going to work without throwing a major wobbler. If I edit this override, which isn't exactly what it is, but we can't override it because it already exists on disk. That's nice. If I did, always pick the wrong key there. Boop, boo. If I did this, then it actually is done. Now it's still saying, I guess we can enable. So I don't think I've reloaded that recently. What does this actually do now? Yeah, all right. So that seems like it might actually work. Well, that was easy. I guess we need a little bit more of a tweak there. So let's do this. One thing that we need to do is fix this so that it's only visible in cases, and we don't want that, for example. Otherwise, we want this. Return self dot is enabled. So if we look at context, that one, we can go ahead and swoop this back to being false, like so. And if we look at context menu, like so, we can do the same thing to this and make that false. So now in this file, it's not there, and in this one, it's not there. But if I did, whoops, let's pick the wrong, that and that. If this has the focus and I do this, it's not showing there. If I do this, it's not showing there. I think I need to reload that. There we go. So this I can override, and doing it this way, I can override. And even if this was here, if I did this, I can override it. Now, unfortunately, that part is doing the wrong thing. So that's unfortunate. Let's close that file and reopen it. What happened here? And clean that part out like so. Actually, we don't even want that. None of the other ones have it. I think self.view isn't the thing you want to use for this. I think that's the issue there. You want to do view.target for that. Let's see. What other commands do we have that are context specific? Diff override. Not that one, this one. That is the thing that this should be doing. And then instead of self.view, this should be target. Because in the specific case of using the tab context menu, it doesn't necessarily, this is the active view, right? So we'll see there's that here. This is here. If I right click here, I've given it the focus. We can see the cursor right there, and it is here. So when I hit it, it does the thing that I would expect, right? And if I do that again, if I'm in this one and I do it on the tab menu doesn't know the file name, it knows the group and the index of the tab in the group, and that's what self.viewTarget is doing. In this case, the command gets extra arguments, and if it hit that, oh, it's still doing the wrong thing. Huh. Uh-oh. Reopen that. Okay. Print target.filename and do this just for now. I probably didn't reload that maybe as many times as I should have. So I did this. There we go. Now it's getting the right thing now that I disabled its ability to screw me. Hit that. Unless setup new override view is actually doing something silly like getting the active view or something. So let's one of those nights, you know. Override this resource. There we go. Beauty. We're gonna say reposition equals false, like that. And we're going to blank blop blop that there and go to the definition of that. Zoop. And we're going to say this. Control K, Control Z, reposition equals true. Okay. If reposition, then do this. Okay. And that's very specific. Okay. When reposition is true, the cursor is jumped to the start of the file as if the user just opened it from disk. Otherwise, the cursor is left wherever it was in the view to begin with. That is a very specific thing, just because when we do this, we say create override and say syntax test this. Uh-oh. There we go. It's just a really big file, I guess. How big is this thing? Yeah. Okay, that's a bad test. Let's try that again. If we say this and we picked, say, ActionScript syntax, we want the cursor to jump to the top of the file because that's what happens when you open a new file. The cursor's at the start, right? So we specifically took the command to say, I want this to happen. So we want the cursor to jump to the top as it's doing here, like that. On the other hand, in the case of this, when we say, yeah, let's view a package file like this, and say we pick, add line in braces, let's say, we might, be looking at this and select some stuff and then say, you know what, I want to override this. And then you could just right click and pick override this resource. And it's converted to be an override, but everything, the selection and everything is still left the way that it was. So you can go ahead and start editing. I think that's a nicer way to do that myself. Oops. What's actually changing here when I pick this? The size of the gutter gets a little bit bigger. I guess because now it has mini diff action. Okay, that makes sense. Beauty, and I can type in there. So that is, more or less doing what we want and need it to do. Um, so technically, this doesn't need a description. You only need a description method when you want the menu item to take on different text depending on the context of the command, of the arguments, which is how this is able to have the name of the file name in these items just as this one does because it has a description method. The description method is only called if the menu item in the Sublime menu file doesn't have a caption. Here we're going to leave the description being set this way even though it's always the same, just because that way the context menu doesn't have a caption for one thing that it doesn't have in other places. And the thing here is we want this to be visible whenever it's enabled, unless always visible is set to true, in which case we can just invoke this. The other thing we could do is try to stick all of this code into a function and call the function in both places, but since they both do the same thing, I don't know how. But that doesn't really save anything because is visible and is enabled will both be invoked. Commands that are invisible are still technically enabled because being visible only stops from appearing in the command palette or in a menu. They can still be enabled and thus executed by a key binding. So both of these will be called. Theoretically, this code is running twice. So does it matter if it's two separate things? No, not particularly. So I think that more or less covers this. Available in the context menu only for files rooted in the package directory that don't exist on disk and the view is read-only, perform the same steps as the current command does, but without prompting, i.e. instead of asking you, it just automatically knows. Is this actually... Oh, I need to refresh. That file doesn't exist anymore. So that, I think, is that feature. Now, the other thing that we were fiddling here is this. Bool p package file and is there a is ignored? I can't remember how the stupid class works. Package info is disabled. Yeah. Oh, is that not what I was doing? I guess that doesn't show up in this list because it's not a method. All right, that makes sense. So here, create override, vintage. Trying to do this doesn't work because this package isn't available. Okay, so that makes sense. Bool p package file and not p dot is disabled. So now if I do it, vintage doesn't appear in the list. I think it's probably what we want for that. I mean, a lot of the commands that we have here, by dint of the fact that package info is scanning for Sublime package files and looking in their contents and things of that nature, are work outside of the auspices of a thing being enabled or disabled or not via, using find resources, because find resources will only find resources for packages that actually exist and are enabled, which is what we want for things like the override report or a package report, because we want to be able to see packages that exist that are disabled and things of that nature. and still get information about them like the version number and the metadata that's stored inside them. So some things you want to work that way, but in order for this, I mean, it is eminently doable for us to make create override command and context create override command. I might even call that promote override, to be perfectly honest, because it's not specifically creating one, but no, we'll leave that the way it is. Wow, ooh, that really dings out, doesn't it? It's very easy for us to do that because we actually have a method here in package info that we generated in like one of the more recent streams to actually determine if a package file exists, like this. Well, not that one. Override file has possible override files unknown. Unpacked contents, expired overrides. I know it is in here. Packed override content, unpacked content, contains file. Check to see if the resource provided exists in this package or not. So what does this do? It looks inside the directory of the package file to see, and then it looks on disk to see. This doesn't help us in this case, A, because it would find files on disk and it doesn't necessarily know. It needs to know if it's inside this part. But also, in order to do this, we need a package file. In order to get a package file, we need to scan for a Sublime package file in 2 locations, including a recursive search in installed packages, because the installed packages folder is recursive. And then we have to list the contents of a directory on disk. And that's a lot of stuff to do every time someone right-clicks to see if this command should be enabled or not. So that seems to be a potential issue here. Why is it still arriving in the menu? May need to fix that, I suppose. Let's go ahead and do that. A context menu, always visible false. So it should hide itself. Did I actually accidentally create override is different from create context override, right? Yes. Enabling, pressing F5. Why is that happening? Let's give it the old quit and restart treatment, shall we? No? Print, checking if we should enable. We should be visible, let's say. Whoop. The only time this returns true is when it says print enabling. So why is this getting there and not doing a thing? Oh, I guess because I should probably do that, huh? Like some sort of not fool. There we go. That sort of thing always screws me up. Okay, whoops. So now, oops, that's not what I wanted to do at all. Override this resource. Doop. Okay. Swank. Delete that. Delete that. Reload. We don't see it there. We don't see it there. And we do see it there. And we do see it here. Nicely done. good. That's going to be that. So we're going to go ahead and merge open repository on this. What sort of changes do we have here? Maybe create a new branch for this stuff. I could go ahead and do that part later if I need to. So the first thing that we're going to do is ignore that and that. So we're going to stage this code, and we're going to stage this code where we import that new symbol, stage this hunk, skip that hunk because that's that bug fix we just added, and stage this hunk, which removes that code in favor of the other one. So that what we have committed is a new item in the core, and this using the core, and say abstract new override view setup code, and commit those two files. Next, we do what? We add a new command there. We add a new command here, including importing it. We have this new untracked file that represents that. This code is actually not needed, so let's go ahead and remove those as well. Make sure it still loads, so that should be good. Oh. When invoked on a read-only view that represents a package resource that does not physically exist on disk, e.g. a view opened by view package resource. In the command palette, promote that view to be a potential new override. It's not reverting at all, and we might reflow that. Does that help? By view package resource, we can even do this. That does make it too long though, doesn't it? Yeah. It's important to me that this be presented like so. When invoked on a read-only view that represents a package resource that does not yet exist on disk, promote that view to be a potential new override. Okay. Save that, reload that. So our run method gets the target and calls setup new override without repositioning the cursor. We have a description. For it's told to be always visible, always be visible, otherwise only be visible if we're enabled, and we're only enabled for views that have a file name where the view is read-only and it starts with the packages path and it's not already a file. And if we ask the resources, if Sublime to find us the resources that all the resources that match the base name of this file, the returned list contains a file that exists there. So this is actually a package resource. Then this should be enabled. Great. That is exactly what we want. So we're going to go ahead and also stage that now. And as staged, we have this stuff. We would also, I guess, need to include that and that. So we can say context menu to create override from existing view. Okay, and commit that. And I'm going to go back and flesh those all out later. And here we stage that hide disabled packages, sorry, hide ignored packages from create override command. There we go. Commit that. That is a important fix, one would think, and that is good. The only other thing that's still there is that untracked file. So with that in place, the last thing to look at here is this. Make minidiff be based on underlying unpacked file. Investigate if we can easily have a setting which sets the reference document on a loaded override to be the underlying file. That would make the minidiff display changes to the base file instead of changes since last save. So let's test that theory. Here we have this. Check for override. Gets triggered on post save and on load. Not on close. The on close handler is for if you use diff externally, then there's a thing there that will delete the temporary magic files if necessary. And that's the hover pop-up that we just added recently. So that's not interesting, although that should probably look like that. No one would think, because everything else is like that. Things like package users view trigger on load before the file actually exists. Context items are only allowed once the file is actually saved. Okay. So if it has a file name, or if it doesn't have a file name, or it's not a file that exists, leave. Check potential override. I think we looked. Actually looks to see if it has a base name, if it starts with something in the packages path, it figures out the name of the package file. It does a scan to see if this exists, and if the shipped package exists or it's installed, figure out if it's an override and return the package name. And so this is actually figuring if this could actually be an override or not, but it requires a file that exists on disk. So one thing we could do, if we do it in both of these places, check for override. If result is not none, apply the group, otherwise remove the group. And if we're applying the group, given the name of an override, return back the contents of the, okay. Get the contents of that resource. I think I need get packed resource here. Given the name of an override file, return back a tuple that indicates if the source package is shipped or installed, the contents of the base file for that is a list of lines. Oh, well, that's not really what we want there, is it? That might take a little bit more work. Let's look at this for a second. Unpacked override contents. Given the name of an override file, return back the contents of the override as a list of items. Now, I guess the other thing to look at here, if we look at what this, again, what this code actually does, I got two versions of the file open now, but so let's look in this one. See if this could conceivably be. It returns none, or it returns a tuple that's the name of the package and the name of the override file, right? When deep is false, only check if the file could potentially be an override. Set deep to true to actually look inside of the package itself to see if this really represents an override or not. So that is sort of scary for the purposes of this. We're calling check for override. It's calling deep with deep equals true. Where exactly is this actually invoked anywhere? There it's defined, imported, called with deep is true. So it's really only called the one way right now, so we wouldn't be breaking too much doing that. So this could actually return a third thing, right? Sorry, this could actually return a third thing. Say if I did that and reloaded all of this, now I think if we came back to events, that would work there. So I think that should still normally do what it would do. So if we vpf default exec, this is a file that exists on disk, but it is detected as being an override because of that event handler thing, right? So if we also said view.set reference document result 2 like this, then I think what we'd find if we open exec is that if we check to see what used to be there, say all of these lines are added and what used to be there is base content. So I think what we would do here, if we go back to this, okay, whoops, excuse me, return none, get only the first path component, which will be a package name. Looking at line 171 here. Split the file name at the path separator. The very first part is the name of the package. Turn it into a Sublime package file. The shipped package would be the shipped packages path and that package file. And the installed thing would be if we called package scan on the installed packages path, which the name of a file and true. So let's go ahead and look and see what that is. And to do that, we're going to look over here like so. We are calling it with recurse true in this case. So it's scanning the path we gave it for the file name we gave it. And as soon as it finds it, it returns it. Otherwise, it returns none. So this is the name of the package. It's just very quickly finding the package. If the shipped package, why is this os.path is file shipped or installed? Oh, sorry, or if the shipped file exists or the installed package is not none, which I guess is an indication that, oh, I see, yes, because here we're just inferring a file name. Here we've actually found it. If one of these two things exists, then the override name is the parts of the file name as split apart by the path separator, but not the first one. If it when deep wasn't set, then do this. Otherwise, it looks inside and does that. Let's say we do none here. Okay, so if we haven't told it to be deep, then just return what this package name is and what this override is, but don't try to return any content. And otherwise, excuse me, my back's a little itchy, do that. So if we came back over to our events.py here, we could say if result2 is not none, then do that. Now this is, of course, is the thing that would be a setting that we would set in this particular case. And what we actually want is, instead of base content, to be actually the content of the file. get packed package file content. That's the thing we actually want to pull out of this. As list is true, oh, and let's zoom that. If as list is true, then it calls read lines, otherwise it calls read. So where is this used? It's used here in packed override contents. Oh, where we can actually pass as list. Return back a tuple that indicates if the source package is shipped or installed and the content of the base file. See, I knew I'd probably implemented that. And there, right on. So what we actually want is this. But we need a Sublime package file to be able to do it. I think that is the issue that I was just thinking of a second ago. Oops. Copy that, zoop that. In theory, that's the thing we'd want to do. But we need an instance of this to have that information. So if we looked at packed override contents, we need an unpacked, oh, sorry, not that one. Packed override contents, we would call get packed, we would be calling this, which means package self.package file needs to be set, which means those two paths need to be set. So I think what we could do here is say package info equals package info for package name scan equals false, because I think the default is true in this init method, right? Yeah. So we're going to scan it for that package name. We'll do that with scan is false, and then package info dot shipped path is equal to shipped and package info dot installed path equals installed. And then we should be able to say this. Do 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 do. Let's take that out and replace this with package info dot packed override contents for info dot file name as list equals false. What does that do? Anything? Oops. View package file exec.py string required. I wonder what that actually returned. Let's close that. Let's find our change. Content equals that, and then print content. Okay. Is it a tuple? What the hell does this return? Oh, cripe. Right. It returns the indication. Okay. This needs a little bit more work anyway, but content is that. So this would actually be content 1, because the first thing is whether it's shipped or not. And who gives a crap? So if I view package file exec, we see absolutely nothing there. If we view package file paste from history, we can see exactly what's different. Those lines. That's actually pretty sweet, I think. But I think what we want is also get content. In this case, content is always going to be none because we haven't done any check to see if this actually is part of the file. Okay. When get content is true, the when get content is true and let me give it a file name path. Check to see if this could conceivably be a reference to an override, i.e. there's a shipped or installed package with that name given in the file name. When deep is false, this only checks the file could potentially be. Set deep to true. When get deep content is true and the file name represents an override, the returned tuple will also contain as a third element the unpacked content of the override. This requires deep to be set to true. File name provided must be blah and blah. Okay, so now in that case, that's always there. So I could say content equals none. And if get content, then do this. Choo, choo, choo. Make a stub package info with enough members filled out to fetch the appropriate content. We're going to do that and that. So the default is to not get content, right? So we're going to reload that. Now that means I can close that because I don't care. I can close that because I don't care. I can close that because I don't care. But over here, if the second result is not none, set the reference document. We haven't asked for get content here. So if we use view package file for paste from history, we don't get anything special. It's just doing what it would do before, which is compared against the underlying file. But if we modified this to say that, so if we said get content equals true here and reload it, loading dictionary? Really? That might explain why that wasn't doing some stuff. If it just decided it should reload a dictionary. Okay, so now if I was to view package file paste from history, we totally get those nice diff segments. Which is pretty darn sweet, I think. And if I did it for something like exec it has the same effect, but it's not as exciting because that's always there. So just looking at those changes that we have there, we have the ability for this to actually return content if we were to ask for it. And here we can say we definitely want it and only display it if some actually comes out. So if this was set to false, then the result of this would be none. And also if it was unable to get it, the result of this would be none. So that means we could have a setting which does this very thing. And what time we got? We've been going for practically 2 hours now, so it's almost time to bow out of this whole operation. But do a little bit of that business. I think, how did this can only be applied when mini-diff is a thing. So here's the issue. We could set it to be a setting that's true or false. So yes, do it, or no, don't. But sometimes you might have a package that's represented in Git. And an example of that would be, in this case, an override audit. Or if you're a default package developer, you might have, say you are working on the Lua syntax. You have the Lua Sublime package file that ships with Sublime, but you're working on the package yourself. So you have symlinked into your packages directory the Lua package from the Git repository. Or you might even actually have an actual repository for a package while it's installed. You might want Git functionality to override so you can see what it looks like since the last revision, which is what mini-diff would do. So instead of setting it to true and false, you could set it to the names of packages that you want to do that. But I think for our purposes here, settings here. What would we call this? Diff2 underlying. When editing an override, this setting controls whether actually, there's one other thing I wanted to check here. Check for potential override happens on post save and on load. So when we open a file, this happens, but it should also happen when we save a file, right? So if we use view package file for paste from history like so, we should see that stuff there. If I was to add a bunch of lines here like this and save, you see that changed because this is what the file used to look like. There was one line here. I modified it so there's 3 lines here now plus that one. But when I save, the mini diff jumps down because that line was already there. So it is updating the reference document in that case, and that plugin's reloading like crazy. So hang on a second. I think I got a sneeze coming. I might have another sneeze. This controls whether when editing an override audit can use the Sublime mini diff functionality oh, pardon me, to show in the gutter how the override is different from the underlying file. Oh. By turning on this setting. Okay, when editing an override, override audit can use the Sublime mini diff functionality to show in the gutter how the override is different. Controls. Okay, when editing an override audit can use the Sublime mini diff functionality to show in the gutter how the override is different from the underlying package file. When enabled, every time an override is loaded or saved, the mini diff is updated to show how the file content differs from the packed version of the file. When disabled, standard mini diff functionality is used, which tracks the state of the buffer since it was originally loaded. For this to be, this setting only has an effect when minidiff is set to true. Enables modified line indicators on tracked files within Git. Huh. So if the setting is true, all files auto, only files tracked with Git, false, none. Do I have any other references to minidiff in the code already? I feel like I do. Yeah, this thing. Diff minidiff. Oh. I guess if it's set to true. Yeah. This setting only has an effect when the minidiff setting in your user preferences is set to true. Okay, so if that was a setting and we copied that and we jumped to core and went all the way up to the top of this thing and said that there was a new setting here called that, and the value of it was true because that's what it was in that file, right? We want that to be on by default, like so. And that should be enough for that and that, mini diff underlying. And then we could come over to here, mini diff underlying equals OA setting that. Okay, so that happens in there. So if I was to say even exec.py, OA setting is not defined. Oh, whoops. Probably should have pulled that, huh? Okay, how about now? Close that and try it again. It's set to true. Yeah, that makes sense. Right. Okay. And the other thing we need is that thing I was just looking at a second ago, this one. And here. So do that, get that setting, OA setting, and mini diff. Mini diff underlying. Okay. Get the content of the mini diff setting. Well, let's do this. Do it this way first. Oh, I guess I can't do that, huh? Yeah, I guess I like that. If we actually need to do it, load the Sublime settings, get the content of the mini diff setting, and say mini diff setting gets that and mini diff. We might even want to say mini diff is true, because we don't want it to work if it's auto. And then that. So reload that now. That's the default setting, right? So that means if I came over here, let's go ahead and close a bunch of these things just to clean this window up somewhat. We'll even close that one for the time being. The default value for this setting is true. So if I open the paste from history, I get that functionality, right? If I set this value to false, then when I do paste from history, I don't get that at all. Good. So if I set it back to true, I again do paste from history, and here it's doing it again. Now I go into core settings, dupe that over here, and set mini diff to false. As soon as you do that, that goes away there. And that also means, I think, I'll move this to this window for the time being. If I said view package file paste from history, I don't get that functionality. And if I created an override on, say, the AppleScript comments, I also don't get that functionality. There's no mini diff available there. Although it looks like I may have set the reference document anyway. We won't worry about that for the moment. Close that without saving. If I changed this instead from false to auto, which is the other value, then it works in that file because that's a Git file. If I created a file for, I don't know, add line before, I get it here. Huh. Might need to fix that. Oh yeah, that was on purpose that was the case, but that's easy to fix. Because when I actually pull that setting to do that, oh, sorry, I guess that's in the core, isn't it? It's over here. If mini diff is true, is what we want to have happen there. So if we close that and say create override for, say, ActionScript syntax, we don't get any diff action like that. We're definitely not setting. That just must be the magic of what that key does. Okay, close that without saving. And if we were to open as a package file the paste from history. We also don't get it in this file. So that's a good, I think. Should be what we want. And if I went back to my settings over here and change mini diff to false, like so, it disappears from that view because it's just always disabled now. If I view package file, paste from history, I still don't get it there. If I try to create an override like this, I don't get it here either, which is what I would expect. And if I change the mini diff setting back to true, that pops back over there and saying create override for this gives me one. Close that without saving, and gives me one here. That is, I think, what we want for that. I'm going to remove that because I like that setting the way that it is, like so. There we go. Close that window, and I think that's us having that. I think that's actually, quite handy. So that is the conclusion of that. We're only 11 minutes over the length of the standard stream, and this is the ultimate feature that I wanted to have for Override Audit version 2.1. So I can go ahead and make some commits in here and go back and backfill some of the other ones, and this stuff will all be ready to go except for that code cleanup of generating and maybe generating our pop-ups looking a little bit nicer. So that is the content of this stream. This has been quite exciting. I'm not sure what we're going to work on next week. I think we might want to jump back into working on HyperHelp a little bit more because it's been a while since I have done anything on that, and I've noticed that there were some problems with bootstrapping last time I played with it, and I'm not sure why that was the case. So I wanted to maybe look into that a little bit more. And try to get some of that stuff all straightened away. Try to get prepared for some sort of release. I also have some other plans for that, like perhaps HyperHelp should be its own package and HyperHelp Core should be a dependency, but maybe we do magic code when the dependency bootstraps in a package that's other than the one that HyperHelp is to actually download the HyperHelp Sublime package. So instead of bootstrapping that package out of our own content, we instead maybe make the dependency download and install the packed version of the package if it's not already there instead. I'm not sure. Might be a little bit cleaner. Got to think about that a little bit more. We'll see what the next stream brings. Until then, thank you for watching. If you have been watching live, if you haven't been, thank you for watching anyway. If you like these things, you can subscribe to this channel. I also have another channel where I do weekly videos every Monday, and I think we're almost to the point where we might start getting started into more package development-y type stuff. I'm not sure if I'm ready to release those yet, or if I want to iterate on them a little bit more to clean them up a little bit. We'll see. And if you have any Sublime Text questions for things that we covered in this stream, any of my streams, any of the videos on the other channel, you can drop those down in the comment section below, or you can hit me on Twitter at OdatNurd with those questions. And we do live streams generally every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Pacific. Check the channel. It should be each one should be scheduled at least a day in advance of the thing. If it's postponed, I generally tweet about it, unless I mentioned in the live stream. I should have tweeted that it was going to be out last time, but I I was really busy with anniversary stuff. But until the next live stream and the next video, this is OdatNurd asking you out there in Sublime Text Land to please have a sublime day.